Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we are moving closer and closer to the second matchup with the Boston Celtics, and more importantly, the return of Jrue Holiday to Milwaukee. So we'll talk about the reception we expect for Jrue, what we're looking at most intently and figure to be watching most closely in this game, and also an interesting conversation that I see keeps popping up on social media. You're in one of two camps, so we'll try to figure out which side makes the most sense, or if we can find a common ground in the middle. We'll get into all that discussion coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I am Justin Garcia. You can hear me on the Bucks Radio Network, joined again by Camille Davis. You can hear her on the Technical Foul podcast and the Carry the G in MKE podcast as well. And we both thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and you can view it on YouTube as well, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Camille, it is, depending on when you listen to this, it may be tonight, it may be 20 hours from now, but the Bucks and the Celtics for the second time this season, Thursday night at Fiserv Forum, and we're going to spend a little more time talking about the matchup, but the fact that this is the return of Jrue Holiday, it figures to be a very, very, I think you can say, special moment and evening at Fiserv Forum that I hope, and I think he'll get this, I hope it is a unanimous standing ovation for Jrue Holiday when he takes the floor.
It's well-deserved for what he did on the court and off the court. And just focusing first on the court, we know that championship run, we don't get that without Jrue Holiday. And we know how much Jrue Holiday loved Milwaukee, loved the Bucks, loved being here. And it's not as if he made a big fuss on his way out the door. We were all caught off guard with the Dame trade that got Jrue out of here. So I truly do hope, like you said, that the crowd response to Jrue is positive. And then you look, it was an article that came out today in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel highlighting the work that him and Lauren have continued to do in Milwaukee with their foundation. So even though he is no longer a resident of the city of Milwaukee, he is still opening his pockets and showing love to the city of Milwaukee. So for what he's done on court, helping us get that ring, to what they continue to do to support the community, I absolutely hope that he does get some cheers, which I know he's wearing the Celtics jersey, but that man is integral to what we were able to accomplish here in the city.
Yeah, and we might as well just get into the Celtics matchup now, because I think the other part of the show and that conversation I referenced is going to take a decent amount of time here. But look, the Celtics have been the best team in the Eastern Conference, start to finish so far. Not unexpected. And I know there was a lot of upset Bucks fans when they did get Jrue Holiday. Not only like, man, this guy that we like, now he's going to a team that you may hate the most or second most behind the Miami Heat. So that was a difficult part. But there was also the Bucks had the spotlight for a week, and they were the favorites. And holy cow, I can't believe Giannis and Damian Lillard are playing together. Not to mention the euphoria of getting Damian Lillard and the shock of how did John Horst pull this off again. And then the Celtics get Jrue Holiday, and with that, they get a lot of that attention and are tabbed the favorites by a lot of media members. And so far, they have shown you why, that this is, as of this moment, the most complete team in the league on both ends of the floor. It's a very deep team. Maybe not so much with how deep they go on the bench, but the talent that they have on the bench and the ways that they can play. So it's easy to see why a lot of people have picked the Celtics coming into the season, and they've lived up to that. I do think it's worth having the conversation, maybe not necessarily now, but just in general of, we continue to point to the Bucks are figuring things out, and it's going to take some time. And I know people are frustrated to hear that. And I get it, because with that, you need to see some progress along the way. And that has certainly been curbed recently here. But it is interesting in that when you watch the Celtics, Granted, we're not watching them as closely as Celtics fans or as the analysis you'll hear from John and the crew on Locked On Celtics. But it does seem like that team is, I wouldn't say peaking, but they're already performing at one of their highest levels. Whereas maybe it's just, hey, we got to point to something, but it is something for the Bucks. Well, we got a lot of room to go up here.
Absolutely. And I was listening to Locked On Celtics because I do enjoy listening to the Locked On podcast for teams that were getting ready to play. And John said something that was really strong. He just came out and said, like, this is the championship team. This is the best rendition that we have seen of the Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Boston Celtics thus far. This team is different. And you pointed to the fact that they have been dominating the league. They're the only team in the NBA that still hasn't reached double-digit losses. They're first in net rating. They're top 5 in both offense and defense. Honestly, top 3 offensively and defensively if you're looking at just points per possession. Offensively, they rank second with 122.4. Defensively, they're second, 111.4. Like, Boston is that team where it's like offensively, they are giving you buckets. They are deep. We already knew about what Tatum can do, what Brown can do. They got rid of Marcus Smart, and for a while there, we were like, oh, well, that was some of their offense. But here comes Kristaps Porzingis, who is still playing very well offensively. And then they add in Jrue Holiday, who in Milwaukee at times, he was a number 2 offensive option, depending on what else was going on. And now he's regulated to just being the number 4, maybe 5 offensive option at times with this Boston Celtics team, which in the offseason, I thought, hey, if he doesn't have to carry as big of an offensive load, what is that going to do for him defensively this upcoming season? And I already pointed to the numbers. It's not even just Jrue Holiday, of course. We know that backcourt is dynamic with Derek White and Jrue Holiday. You have Al Horford coming off the bench, and I know Al's been getting older, but the game has not aged too poorly for him at this point. So the Boston Celtics present just a big riddle. It's going to be another measuring stick game for the Bucks, which is what you get excited for, right? During the December stretch there, people were like, well, the Bucks aren't really playing anybody. And with the NBA schedule, it's all going to come back around at some point. You're going to end up playing everybody. And maybe with this in-season tournament, you're seeing people too many times, but it comes around. And now we're at a stretch where we have the Celtics, then we have the Warriors and the Kings. So this is the first game of a 3-game stretch that I think is going to tell us a lot about this Bucks team.
It is. And I had mentioned before or after that first matchup in Boston that the interesting part about these 4 games that these two teams play is that they come at kind of checkpoints in the season. That the first one was very early and the Bucks were starting to get better offensively. Defensively, the same conversation we've had. It came after putting Brook Lopez in the drop, and you were seeing some growth there, but it was nowhere near what we were seeing in the month of December. Here, you're coming into it off of a very, very rough stretch of basketball, but you're at about halfway through the season. The next matchups are towards the end of the season, where I think it's a little more than a month from now. I think it's in March that you'll play the 3rd game, and then it's a week or 2 after that. That's the 4th. So they set up some nice progress checkpoints for the Bucks to not only see how have we come along and grown since then, but like, how are we doing it against this Boston Celtics team? Because, look, I get there are other landmines out there, and especially with all the issues we've talked about this Bucks team having to sort out. But ultimately, the Celtics and the 76ers are the 2 teams. And I guess at some point we're going to have to put Miami in there as well, but especially Boston, Philly. Those are the 2 teams that these are maybe the 2 best teams clearly in the conference, depending on your feeling of the Bucks. So it's important to see not only where are we at for our overall progress, but how are we performing against this team? Because the reality is you're going to have to get through at least one of those 2 teams on a path to the NBA Finals.
At the very least, that's the part. We didn't even mention the Pacers at this point, which there are some people who believe like, hey, it's regular season. That's not going to stand in the postseason, but that's the thing with these regular season matchups, right? It gives teams an idea of where they stack up against one another. And at this point, the Pacers don't have any fear of the Bucks. So if that was a play up matchup, like that team is going into the game thinking like we can do whatever we want against the Bucks. And the Celtics over the last few seasons here have done a pretty good job in the regular season of asserting their dominance over the Bucks, especially thinking about last season, how the game earlier this season began, where the Bucks just got off to a really slow start. We saw that a lot to start the season with the Bucks, where they get off to just that really slow start, then they have to kind of work their way back into it. I mean, we saw that against the Jazz as recently as Monday as well, where they get down big and now they have to exert so much energy trying to get back into the game. And that was the case in Boston as well. I believe they were down by like 20 plus points in that Celtics game, were able to get the lead down to 3 by the time the final whistle blew. But it's a measuring stick game. You want to see how you're doing. You don't want to see the Bucks making some of the same mistakes that they were making in that first matchup against Boston, because as you said, they're top of the East right now. Between them and Philly, those are the two teams who were like, hey, championship contenders. I brought up the Pacers just because we lost the regular season matchup. No one's putting the Pacers into that championship tier, but the point goes about what regular season matchups can do for the psyche of a team and what it can do about how you feel, how you might match up against other teams going forward. So Thursday's going to be a big game for the Bucks, as big as it can be regular season wise. And with Jrue Holiday coming back to Milwaukee, there's that added narrative piece to it, in addition to just seeing the two top teams in the East go at it.
Yeah, the return of Jrue Holiday and the reception we expect him to get. Speaking of Jrue, some interesting numbers for Jrue. I don't know what it actually means, but I do want to get into that coming up after the break. Well, time to talk to you about our friends at Prize Picks. They are the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They're also the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, because it's just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, all you have to do is pick more than or less than in 2 to 6 player stat projections. And from there, watch the winnings roll in. Basketball season is certainly upon us. So now you can pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. It's a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. The Green Bay Packers are in the playoffs and still playing. So if you wanted to, you could combine Damian Lillard 3-pointers and Jordan Love touchdown passes, set something around, let's say 5.5 there, and see if you can match that total there. You can play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz. You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view some entries from some of the biggest names in Prize Picks community each week. It's very simple. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. The code is LockedOnNBA. Again, LockedOnNBA. Use that code, go to that address, and you'll get a first deposit match for up to $100 on Prize Picks. And Camille, we should mention as well, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with all the local experts you would expect from Locked On, in addition to our national shows covering every single league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. And as Jim Ross would say, business certainly picking up as we're less than a month out from the trade deadline. You got the NFL playoffs here. Everything's starting to converge here. So no better place than Locked On Sports Today to keep you covered. I mentioned some numbers, and again, we're not the Celtics experts, but what really struck me was, I think early in the season, there was this conversation, and maybe not even conversation, murmur might be the best way to put it. And maybe it was Bucks fans just trying to make themselves feel better about not having Jrue Holiday and having to go against him. But there was this chatter of, I think Jrue Holiday's not going to age too well, and maybe he's already on the decline. We know offense isn't his strength, not to say he can't score, but it's a little different from Damian Lillard. He can get off his shot from the logo, and he can knock down threes, and he can score on the half court. And I think there's certainly been some games that have popped up. There was one, a week or so ago when the Oklahoma City Thunder torched the Boston Celtics, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was attacking Jrue. Now, in fairness, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has done that to everyone so far this season. But I was struck by, and again, these aren't massive sample sizes. You usually want to look to at least 100 lineups, 100 possessions being played with a lineup. And in the minutes where Jrue Holiday has been off the floor, the Celtics defense and offense have both been better than with him on the floor. And the most interesting one to me, and I think it really points to what you mentioned about Jaylen Brown, saying we want everybody to be considered for defensive player of the year or all defense with the way that we're going to get after it this season. Derek White is the guy that has taken a massive leap. Obviously, he's always been a very skilled and good defender. But what he's doing everywhere, steals and blocks, and the way he's defending the perimeter, that is what stands out the most. And in those minutes where Derek White is on the floor and Jrue Holiday is off the floor, the Celtics, it's almost 800 possessions, so it's a pretty sizable sample size here. The Celtics have a defensive rating of just over 104. And you mentioned they're at 110, 111 for their season average. Yeah. So 7 points per possession better when they're playing Derek White versus Jrue Holiday. And offensively, the number is better as well at a 126.
It's a luxury to say that, hey, our defense doesn't suffer when we sit Jrue Holiday, while there are Bucks fans here who are lamenting the fact still that we don't have a Jrue Holiday to be the biggest point of attack defender on a team to help where they're seeing leaks within the Bucks system in itself. And I'm not sure if we mentioned the Jaylen Brown thing on air or off air. It's all merging together with as much Bucks basketball as we talk. But going into the season, Jaylen Brown mentioned the fact that, hey, I want every starter on this team to get all defensive votes. Everybody. And Jaylen Brown is somebody who definitely has taken that to heart in the way that he's been playing. And you pointed out what Derek White is doing. And again, just thinking about the fact that you can sit Jrue Holiday and you're not suffering. That's the piece of it that stands out to me the most. I don't think of it as a knock to Jrue Holiday or saying that he's aging and he can't do what he used to do, because I think that even as Jrue ages, you can use him in some really interesting situations. We saw when he was here in Milwaukee, we used him on bigs from time to time as well, because he has the strength where if he gets switched onto a big, you're not like, quickly, we need to figure out how to get him off of him. You're like, he can hold his own long enough here until either the possession ends or we can get another switch to get him back onto that guard. So Jrue Holiday's game, I think, is going to age pretty well. And the fact that he, again, we know he's a 4th, 5th offensive option for the Celtics. And when you have a backcourt mate who can also lock up like Derek White, it changes the equation. It changes the equation a lot. And I didn't expect for those numbers to be the case with you saying that they're better defensively with him off of the court. But I think it's just a compliment to the guys who are playing in the game, because when you do take Jrue off, who are you bring? You can bring Al Horford on. You can go really big. You can have Al Horford with Porzingis, with Brown, with Tatum, with White. So there's so many different things that this Boston Celtics team can do lineup wise that can pose a lot of interesting dilemmas for opposing offenses.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part too is the Celtics have that luxury of, I guess you would say save, but you could basically save Jrue for the postseason because of the offense that's around him and because of Derek White in the backcourt as well, that you'll have your nights where, hey, we're going to need you to take this challenge, and he's going to be up for it too. But you can really try to save those minutes and reduce the miles that you're putting on him this season. They have that luxury that I don't think any other team in the league has in terms of the personnel that they have out there. And all the numbers really back that up except for one. So he's attempting just over 10 field goal attempts per game, which would be his lowest total since his rookie season in 2009, 2010. 3-point attempts, he's shooting 42% on threes this year. And again, I think that speaks to who they have on the perimeter. When you have Derek White and Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum and Kristaps Porzingis, even Al Horford, all those guys can shoot. So Jrue Holiday in a lot of these instances is going to be sagged off of the most. That we've seen that in highlights and clips of games, and that's going to benefit him. But again, 4.5 3-point attempts per game. That is his lowest since the 2016-17 season when he was in New Orleans. So you see all these numbers. His effective field goal shooting right around where it was his seasons in Milwaukee. Same with how he's performing on twos, a little bit lower there. That may be the one thing that you look at and say, well, what's going on here if he's not scoring in the mid-range and around the rim quite as much. But the one area that does strike me is his minutes. Granted, it's not massive, but his minutes per game right now, and he's played about half as many games as he did last season with the Bucks. It's the highest it's been since he played for the Pelicans, and he's just under 35 minutes per game. Granted, we have seen players playing more this season. I talked about how Giannis has missed one game. Damian Lillard has missed 3 games. That you've seen everywhere except Philadelphia and Miami, that stars are playing every single game, it seems like. So I'm sure that's a part of it. But I do wonder, and especially if Boston right now, 4 games that they have in separation on the Bucks in the loss column, if they keep that number right around where it is, I do wonder if we start to see those minutes start to decline for Jrue in the second half, just to keep him fresh for the playoffs.
It just might. To your point about the minutes that he's been putting on his body, he's the second leading player on the Celtics when it comes to minutes per game. He's right behind Jason Tatum, and he's about a half a minute or so in front of Jaylen Brown, which is interesting to me. I don't think I would have initially thought that Jrue Holiday is getting more minutes on a per game basis than Jaylen Brown is, but that's the situation that he's currently playing in. When I think about just the way that the Celtics are constructed, and coming into the season, we were like, hey, a strong starting 5, a strong 6-man rotation when you think about Al Horford coming off the bench as well. But there were questions around the depth of this team and what that might look like for them. You've seen guys stepping up from Sam Hauser to Peyton Pritchard. Guys are stepping up in their limited minutes. But this is still going to be a more top-heavy team. And one of the things that we've had some interesting debates about here in Milwaukee under Bud was, hey, are guys going to be ready for the playoffs with their current minute load once that goes up? Because once it gets to the playoffs, the Celtics already employ a pretty short rotation for the most part against us the last time. They only went 3 deep in their bench or on their bench. So we know that's going to be the case come playoff time. And it's a season where Jrue's going to be more regularly getting those minutes in. So it'll be interesting to watch, but I do think that it's not, if they can make it there healthy, that's the thing. You have to make it to the playoffs healthy, but I do think it'll be beneficial for him to have already been racking up these minutes, being used to that minute load. So when you do add on another 4 or 5 per game, whatever the case may be for them, how they're going to do their rotations, you're able to ease into that a little bit better. Now, you always have to get used to that playoff intensity again, but with Jrue being the second most minutes played per game on the Celtics, I think that just shows how valuable he is to that team. Although the numbers might be down across certain areas, we talked about how even their defensive rating is better with him on the bench. We know what he does to this team, what he brings to this team, and the fact that Jrue Holiday is also an unselfish player, where he doesn't care about the minutes, doesn't care about what the stats say. He just wants to get that win. I think that also helps out for the Celtics as well.
It'll be interesting to watch, and I don't think the injury report has been updated for the Bucks. It's clearly not for the Celtics. They play tonight in Minnesota, but we'll take a look at that in the last segment of the show and get to that conversation that I mentioned at the top as well as we wrap things up after this on Locked On Bucks. Well, before we do get to that, I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if any of your significant others or family members got sick while a supply chain issue kept them from the life-saving medication they needed. Thankfully, we'll all be okay because of Jace Medical. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, cyanosis, skin infections, among others. The staff could not be any more helpful to any of you, and this stuff can happen to any of us. Visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com and use the offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your first order. That's Jace with a J, Jase, medical.com. Well, Camille, I mentioned that conversation that we were carving out some time for, and I've seen quite a bit of this on all social channels, and it's something that we've gotten into on Locked On Bucks
Mhm.
throughout the season. I know people have not been pleased when they hear me preach, "Hey, it's going to take time," and I get that. And look, I understand the pushback that you expect to see more progress with the time. You're willing to give time and understand this is going to be a process to develop that chemistry, to learn a new system, to learn new teammates. You get all that. And we've seen that as recently as 3 years ago when Jrue Holiday arrived here. But the trade off is we'll give you that time. We need to see steady growth and we
Yeah.
need to see signs that things are moving in the right direction. Up until January 1st, maybe even December 25th. We really saw that for about a month. And now it's really halted. But I was just struck by a lot of the chatter that you'll see everywhere about you're either on the side of look, it's going to take time. This wasn't the case, or this was the case, I should say, in 2021. And I know I pointed to the same thing that in 2021, when the Bucks did win an NBA championship, and that was the offseason they traded for Jrue Holiday, that was when they brought in Bobby Portis. 50% of their roster was new. It
Mhm.
took them until really that final game before the All-Star break, which ironically enough was against the Memphis Grizzlies. That was the game where Jrue Holiday hit the game winner. And you go into the All-Star break. I think you exited the All-Star break then with, in addition to that win, I think it was 7 more wins. It was a 7 or 8 game win streak right around the All-Star break where it really felt like, okay, this is the group I expected to see. It was an 8-game win streak, which started with that game against the Grizzlies,
Mhm.
capped with a win over the Boston Celtics at home. Um, and I've seen people point to, well, in 2021, we had a 5-game losing streak. We had this. There was all this up and down play. You can't make too much out of one game. And I do agree with all that. But I don't think it's this take is right or the no, we got to be panicked about everything is right. I think it's somewhere in the middle. So as frustrated as people get, if they view me as too positive or too much of a let's just wait and see, I don't think the rush to judgment and the this team is screwed is any more sound. I think there are clearly some alarming things we've seen and some warning signs and red flags that need to be addressed. But again, it is going to take time. And I mentioned, ironically enough, that final game in the All-Star break before the All-Star break against the Memphis Grizzlies, because
Mhm.
wouldn't you know it, Camille, the Bucks' last game before they depart for a week-long All-Star break this season is against the Memphis Grizzlies.
Wow. The script writers got that one. That was interesting. That's a nice twist there. But no, speaking of script writers, it makes me think of the NFL in the sense that the NFL is only 16 games, right? Over a course of a few months. So every game feels so big. And after each NFL game there is so much dialogue, so much discourse about, hey, who is this team? Is this true? Is this true? I think this is actually the case. And a lot of it tends to be overreaction. And sometimes you're like, hey, I've identified an early trend and I'm looking at this now for the rest of the season. Like just again, that parallel. Packers were 2-5 at one point in the season, and the conversation was around the draft. And as we sit here this weekend, we're getting ready for them to head to Dallas and take on the Cowboys in the playoffs. So it's one of those things where you try to have perspective. And when you put that onto the NBA, where it's 82 games over the course of a few months there, where you're seeing your team a couple nights a week, and you can go up and down really quickly if you live on a game-to-game basis. And I've been told myself that I can be too optimistic, but I actually prefer to look at it as just I'm trying to be as logical as possible, right? Because I'm a fan of the Milwaukee Bucks, and fandom can take you to some extreme emotional places because you have a connection to this team. So what I always try to do is be as logical as I possibly can. And when the season started, you're seeing things get off to a rocky start, and you're like, okay, this doesn't look exactly how I thought it would look when we acquired Dame and we were pairing him with, Giannis. Like, hey, I thought I'd see more pick and roll, or I thought it would look like this. And as time goes on, what I kept saying is I just need to start getting some larger sample sizes. And we're at a point now in the season where we are having those larger sample sizes. I like to break the season up into tenths, into quarters, before All-Star, after All-Star. And with this Bucks team, there's going to be some really interesting checkpoints, right? From the first 4 games to when they switch to a drop to when they lost Jay Crowder. And then it's going to be interesting seeing the numbers with Jay Crowder back in the lineup as well. So for me, I think it's a situation where a lot of things are true. And there are people who are just clinging on to one aspect of it without acknowledging the other thing. So like, it's all complementary. Can coaching be better? Absolutely. We talked about that on yesterday's show of Locked On Bucks and ways that we think that that can improve. The offense has to be better. Part of the reason that they're having this January slump so far is the shooting performances. Like, this is a top heavy team. And if Damian Lillard is only going to be shooting 16% from three, it's going to be hard for you to win games because you're depending on Giannis, you're depending on Dame, you're depending on Chris to be consistent offensive options. And we thought the Bucks bench might be something better because you think of a guy like Bobby Portis coming off the bench and being able, hey, you just go and get buckets. It hasn't been working. So it's time to be like, hey, are there other ways we can tweak around here and make this better for the roster that we currently have? Like, hey, maybe if we're not getting bench production, maybe we move Malik Beasley to the bench, insert someone else who doesn't need, and I understand exactly why you want Malik in the starting lineup. You see it when he gets over 4 or 5 threes a game, the ball's moving well. He's a 47% three-point shooter so far this season on a very decent volume. So you want to have him out there and he's valuable, but like, I get all the conversations around this team because there are so many different pieces that you can point to and say, this doesn't look right. But I think it's a mistake to only focus on one piece without looking at everything that is contributing to that particular piece not working as well.
I mean, it really is the epitome of team in that the way this team is constructed too, it all has to come together, right? Like Malik Beasley, and you mentioned what he does in terms of the spacing and opening things up for Giannis. That you think about when Giannis was at his peak of efficiency, not to say he's been inefficient recently here, but it's taken a dip from what we were seeing early in December, really up until Christmas. Malik Beasley was knocking down shots. That's when Damian Lillard had really started to look like the Damian Lillard from years past in Portland. And that opens up everything for Giannis, where it makes life much easier for him. Same with all of the concerns that we've all gone over with Malik Beasley and the rest of the defense. If your offense is there and if you're hitting the shots, like that can offset some of it.
Yeah.
So it all has to come together at the same time. We've seen brief flashes of that. And we've seen a lot more of where one piece is there, the other piece is not, or one piece is getting there and the other is clearly not. So that's part of the look. We do have to give this some more time. And you know this, but to the listeners that don't, outside of the Bucks radio network, outside of TMJ, I work in analytics. And look, that's why you'll hear me cite all this stuff of we need sample size. You need larger sample size. And not only that, you take the numbers and you figure out not only is this good or bad, but why did this happen? And how do we correct what it is that's causing this to happen? And I think we've all done that with the defense. And we pointed to all of our strategies and theories of what's going to get there. But as you and Frank have talked about on social media, on the post game as well the other night, there isn't one magic bullet. There isn't one fix that's out there that if we do this, this will change it. And I think that's probably the most frustrating thing for a lot of fans to hear, because that means that dreaded word of this is going to take time. But it's not as simple as if we fire the coach, this changes everything. Or if we make a trade, this changes everything. There are some things you need to implement and strategies. I think it's pretty clear at this point you need to adjust and move on from, or say, how can we do this a little differently or continue to throw some different looks? I'm sure there are personnel decisions that are going to be made as well, but it's not just one thing that's going to fix this. So I do need to see, and I'm not saying approaching 40 games is not a large sample size, but I do need to see more of a sample of once this team has kind of moved there. And it's the old, bleep or get off the pot, that we're getting to that point. And once you do get there, I need that sample size just to see, is there just nothing that can be done here? And we move on, or we have to move on to something else, or is there something here that's working and we just have to be patient with it?
Absolutely. I think you summed that up beautifully. And the sample size piece of it is really interesting because, like, for some people, they might say like, hey, I only needed 15 games to know what this team is going to be. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here like, I need to see, like you mentioned, like half the season is a very large sample size, and it's coming up right before the trade deadline, where it's like, now we have to make decisions on, if we're not where we want to be now, What do we need to do in order to be there? Is it personnel? As you mentioned, is it additional adjustment? So there's a lot of things to look at. And I know that the answer is frustrating of hearing like it's not just one thing. If it was one thing, you could fix it easily. But this Bucks team is going through a slump. They're going through a down period. And it's a long season that happens. What you hope to see is the team stays together. You hope to see this team doesn't fall apart, and you hope to see improvement. And if we don't start seeing that, well, then we have to have some harder conversations.
I think long story short for both of us is what we're saying is I'm not telling you that everything's going to be fine, right?
Facts.
I'm not telling you, well, it's over, right? I'm saying we don't know yet. I understand there are a lot of signs that are pointing to the latter of maybe it's not. Before, there were a lot of signs that were pointing to the former too, of maybe they figured it out. I get the schedule is a part of that, but that's why I say we need more time, because no matter what you've seen in recently, and it's prisoner of the moment syndrome, like I'm not going to base an assumption off of that. Just as we said, you can't say, yeah, well, why is nobody mentioning the Bucks when they were blowing through teams early in December and they weren't playing a challenging schedule?
Right.
You can't make that the opposite assertion right now when it's a losing skid in 4 of the last 5 and nothing looks right just on that sample size. So again, it's not to say don't be concerned or don't raise these questions and don't question, is this going to work or should we consider this? But my point is, it is still, as much as you may not want to hear it, it is too early to definitively say one way or another, this is going to work or this is not going to work.
Yeah. And again, as we've already mentioned throughout this show, Thursday is going to be a key checkpoint for this team, as I would say. Like if you played Mario Kart or whatever the case may be, you're going through your checkpoints. This is another one for this Bucks team, especially with the way that they started off 2024. I hope that whatever personal reasons we're keeping Dame out, that he's been able to resolve those or at least get some time to slow the world down and refocus and take care of himself, because the Bucks are going to need him against the Celtics. They're going to need him throughout the rest of this season if they want to achieve the championship aspiration. So Thursday, big checkpoint for the Bucks.
And real quick there as we wrap up, Damian Lillard is expected to play again. No injury report out yet for the Bucks, but Griff did say he anticipates Damian Lillard would be back with the team for that game against the Celtics. It does not sound like Jay Crowder will, though he's very close. We saw him assigned to the Wisconsin Herd. I would assume that's Saturday or Sunday that we see Jay Crowder, but Damian Lillard should be good to go. We'll be back Thursday night with the post-game show and the recap of the second matchup with the Boston Celtics. We'll do the live show again over the weekend and then a recap of 2 more home games after that, the Golden State Warriors Saturday night and the Sacramento Kings on Sunday. I feel like something else is happening Sunday too, but I'm not sure what it is, but we'll find time for it. We'll talk to you with the post-game recap of the Bucks and Celtics tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.